I am Maria Josepha Amalia, once a princess of Saxony, once called Queen of Spain, now just a lost soul drifting through the cold, dark hallways of the Madrid palace. In 1834, when I heard that my husband, Ferdinand VII, had died, a freezing chill cut through my heart, as if the air itself carried the weight of his cruel reign. I stood before his lifeless body, my heart pounding, as memories of the nightmare I endured came rushing back, terrifying nights facing his twisted body, days trapped in his paranoid, vicious world. Beneath the silk sheet covering him lay the horrifying secret that destroyed me, the queens before me, and the entire kingdom of Spain, a deformed organ, a symbol of decay, a weapon of pain. I'm telling this story not to beg for pity, but so the world knows what I suffered living with Ferdinand, from the first day I stepped into this palace until he took his final breath. If you're drawn to the dark secrets of history, share your thoughts. Hit the like button, and let me know where you're hearing this from. We're connected across centuries, uncovering the painful truths of the past together. The Madrid Palace in 1819 was where my tragedy began. I was only 24, a young woman with dreams of a dazzling royal life, but when I walked into that palace, it felt more like a tomb than a home. Back in Saxony, I was raised to believe I could be a queen in a fairy tale, but as soon as I passed through those massive gates, I knew something was terribly wrong. The walls seemed to whisper sorrow, and the people around me looked at me with pity, not welcome. I'd been warned about Ferdinand's special difficulties, but no one told me the truth. I thought I could handle any challenge, that I'd find a way to make this marriage work. I was so wrong. Ferdinand VII, I came to understand, was the result of centuries of royal inbreeding between the Habsburg and Bourbon families. Their bloodline, once praised as sacred, had become a genetic curse, producing people with broken minds and twisted bodies. Ferdinand was the living proof of that curse. When I first met him, I was shocked. He didn't look like a king. He was thin, nervous, with restless eyes hiding a deep shame. That shame came from his body, from the grotesque deformity I'd later face with dread. His private parts, as I discovered in horror, were unnaturally huge and misshapen, like something from a nightmare, not a human. It was both his greatest humiliation and his sick, twisted pride, the root of his reign's cruelty and the ruin of everyone around him. From the day I became his wife, I lived in a world of fear and disgust. Every night he summoned me to his bedroom was like walking into a torture chamber. His doctors, cold men with trembling hands, set up strange tools, custom-made pillows, bottles of odd-smelling oils, and metal devices that looked more like surgical instruments than anything loving. They said these were needed to help Ferdinand, to stop his deformed body from hurting me. But nothing could hide the truth. Every moment with him was a battle against physical pain and mental collapse. I learned to swallow my screams, to shut down my heart, but inside, I felt like I was dying little by little. Ferdinand wasn't just my husband. He was a king obsessed with his own failures. He saw mockery in every glance, heard whispers in every greeting. His paranoia spread through the palace like poison, turning it into a prison where everyone was a suspect. He watched me through secret holes in the walls, his eyes burning with suspicion, searching for signs I was betraying him. I lived under constant watch. Every step I took, every word I said, recorded by his loyal spies. But the worst was his desperation to have a child. Every time we failed, he blamed me, saying my body rejected him because of disloyalty or some hidden sin. I became a tool, a test subject in his bedroom, where doctors and frauds from across Europe gathered to try to break the curse of the Bourbon bloodline. The Madrid Palace wasn't my home. It was a living grave. I watched Spain crumble under Ferdinand's rule. The colonies in the Americas rebelled one by one, the treasury ran dry, and the people starved while he spent fortunes on bizarre medical devices and fake healers. I saw his courtiers tremble at his anger, saw loyal men punished for a wrong glance. I heard stories of the queens before me, Maria Antonia, who died in despair, Maria Isabel, shattered by the horrors of his bedroom, and I knew my fate would be no different. Yet I kept trying, not out of love for Ferdinand, but in the faint hope that a child might free me from this hell. In 1829, when I learned I was pregnant, I thought I'd found a spark of light in the darkness. But that hope was crushed by Ferdinand's obsession. He surrounded me with doctors, mystics, and strange rituals, treating the child in my womb like the kingdom's greatest treasure. When I gave birth to Early, and the baby a girl lived only a few hours, my world fell apart. I had no strength left to go on, and 3 weeks later, I took my last breath, leaving Ferdinand to his madness. Even in death, I couldn't escape him. My spirit lingered, watching his final years as he married Maria Cristina and claimed a child, Isabella too, who wasn't his, in a desperate attempt to save his dynasty. When Ferdinand died in 1834, I was there, invisible, as the doctors examined his body. They found the horrifying truth: an organ 14 inches long, twisted with scars from his pathetic attempts to fix himself, a testament to his lifelong torment. But I felt no pity. He had destroyed me, destroyed Spain, and left behind a broken kingdom. My story is a warning. Power in the hands of a man consumed by his flaws can lead to disaster. Listen, share, and let my suffering live on as a lesson, so the world never forgets what I endured. As I stood before Ferdinand V's lifeless body in the cold room of the Madrid palace in 1834, as I shared with you the memories of my years. With him, a king cursed by a twisted body and a paranoid mind cut through me like sharp knives. I took you through that moment, when the pain and horror of my life burned clear as fire. But to understand why I, Maria Josepha Amalia, once a hopeful princess of Saxony, became a victim of his fiery reign, I must take you back to my past, to the days before I ever set foot in Spain. Come with me to Dresden, where I was born and raised, where my innocent dreams were nurtured, and where the first signs of the nightmare appeared, leading me to my tragic fate with Ferdinand. I was born on a freezing winter day in 1803, in a small palace in Dresden, the heart of the Saxony kingdom. That palace wasn't the grand castle of fairy tales, but a crumbling pile of stones, where cold winds slipped through cracks and light barely touched the dusty windows. My family, though royal, lived in poverty, weighed down by debts and dreams far beyond our reach. My father, Duke Maximilian, was a weak man, lost in stories of Saxony's past glory instead of facing reality. He'd sit by the fireplace, talking about ancient battles and dazzling feasts of our ancestors, while the treasury stood empty and our courtiers whispered of an inevitable collapse. My mother, Duchess Carolina, was a harsh woman, with eyes sharp as knives and a heart hard as stone. She taught me that love was a luxury, that a princess's duty was to sacrifice herself to save the family's honor. "You are our only hope," she said, her voice cold, and I felt the weight of an entire kingdom pressing down on my shoulders. My life in Dresden was a string of strict lessons and stifled dreams. I was taught court manners, how to play the harpsichord and how to embroider, but those lessons brought no joy. My teachers, old women with stern faces, insisted I must become a perfect princess, a gift for any prince willing to pay the price. But in the rare moments I was alone, I escaped to the palace library, reading tales of heroic queens and romantic marriages. I dreamed of a noble king, someone who would love and protect me, leading me to a life full of light. Those dreams, I now see, were dangerous illusions, fed by the innocence of a girl who hadn't yet learned the world's cruelty. When I turned 15, the Dresden palace buzzed with talk of marriage. Messengers from across Europe arrived, carrying portraits of princes and promises of political alliances. But my family wasn't looking for love or happiness for me. They were looking for a way to save our finances. My father, with tired eyes, spoke of selling family heirlooms to pay debts, while my mother quietly made lists of kings and dukes who could buy me. I overheard them whispering at night, when they thought I was asleep, about how Saxony would collapse if I didn't fulfill my duty. I felt like a lamb raised only to be sacrificed, but I clung to a sliver of hope, telling myself that maybe fate would smile on me, that my future husband would be kind, even if he wasn't the prince of my dreams. In 1818, a letter arrived from Spain, sealed with the red crest of the Madrid court. Ferdinand VII, the king ruling a crumbling empire, was seeking a new bride. I knew little about him, only that he was a middle-aged man who had lost 2 wives in tragic circumstances. My father's courtiers whispered about his chaotic reign, about the American colonies rebelling, and about a king mocked by his own people. But my mother saw a chance. "He needs an heir," she said, her voice dry. "You'll be the one to give him that, and we'll be saved." I wanted to protest, to beg to stay in Dresden, but my mother's glare silenced me. I was the family's only asset, sold to Spain for the price of an alliance. The weeks before leaving Saxony were a blur of rushed preparations and uneasy signs. Tailors sewed my wedding dress, but no one smiled or offered blessings. The maids, usually chatty, now bowed silently as they passed me. I overheard them whispering about the fates of Maria Antonia and Maria Isabel, Ferdinand's previous wives, who were said to have died in pain and despair. One night, as I prayed in the palace's small chapel, an old priest approached me. "Be strong, princess," he said, his voice shaking. "Spain is a place of darkness, and the king, he carries a heavy burden." I asked what he meant, but he only shook his head and left, leaving me with a nameless fear. My mother, noticing my worry, called me to her room. She handed me a small box containing a pearl rosary and a tiny Bible. "These are your weapons," she said. "Use faith to overcome any challenge. Don't ask too much. Don't be afraid. You are a Saxony princess, and you will do your duty." But when I looked into her eyes, I saw no love, only desperation. She knew what awaited me in Spain, but she chose silence. I clutched the rosary, hoping it would protect me, but deep inside, I felt a cold dread. I was being sent to a place even God might not reach. The journey to Spain was long and lonely. I sat in the carriage, watching fields and forests pass by, feeling like a prisoner sent to exile. The guards traveling with me spoke little, and when I tried to ask about Ferdinand, they dodged my questions. One night, at an inn, I overheard a servant telling another about the curse of the Bourbon blood. He spoke of children born with twisted bodies, kings driven mad by genetic decay. I pretended not to hear, but my heart raced. I began to wonder if Ferdinand was a victim of that curse, and if I, his new wife, would pay the price. When I reached the Spanish border, a group of Madrid courtiers came to meet me. They bowed with fake respect, but their eyes were full of pity. An older woman, who said she was a court maid, took my hand and whispered, "Be patient, princess. The king, he needs your understanding." I wanted to ask what she meant, but the carriage rolled on, carrying me toward a fate I couldn't escape. As the Madrid palace came into view, with its grim towers and cold stone walls, a freezing chill pierced my chest. I knew my dream of a glorious royal life was dead, and a nightmare was waiting. As I shared in Dresden, where my dreams of a fairy tale life were crushed by the harsh reality of my family's desperation. I arrived in Spain in 1819, carrying a fragile hope that faded. The moment I saw the grim walls of the Madrid palace, the whispers of my father's courtiers and the old priest's warning echoed in my mind, hinting at the darkness awaiting me. Now, as Maria Josepha Amalia, the new bride of Ferdinand VII, I stepped into the heart of that darkness. The wedding, and the first days of our marriage threw me into a nightmare I couldn't escape, a world where my husband's twisted body and tormented mind became my prison. Let me take you through those early moments, when the truth of my life with Ferdinand hit me like a storm, shattering my spirit and revealing the horror that would define my days as queen. The wedding took place in the fall of 1819, but it was no celebration. The Grand Cathedral in Madrid, filled with candles and heavy incense, felt more like a funeral than a union. The courtiers stood in silence, their faces pale, their eyes avoiding mine. I walked down the aisle in a heavy gown, my hands trembling as I clutched the pearl rosary my mother gave me. Ferdinand stood at the altar, dressed in gold, but his face was tight with worry, his eyes darting as if he expected betrayal at any moment. I wanted to believe this was the start of something new, that maybe I could find a way to please him, to be the queen Spain needed. But the air was thick with dread, and the priest's chants sounded like prayers for the dead. As we exchanged vows, I felt a cold knot in my stomach, a warning that this marriage would be my undoing. That night, the real horror began. After the ceremony, I was led to the royal bedchamber by a group of maids, their faces grim. They carried strange items, pillows shaped in odd ways, bottles of oily liquids, and metal tools that looked like they belonged in a doctor's office, not a bedroom. I asked what they were for, but they only bowed and whispered, "It's for your safety, Your Majesty." My heart raced as they arranged the pillows on the bed, their hands shaking. When Ferdinand entered, I saw him fully for the first time, and my breath caught in terror. His body, hidden under robes during the day, was now exposed, and the sight of his deformity, the unnatural, twisted organ I'd only heard whispers about, made me freeze. It was monstrous, grotesque, nothing like a human body should be. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was trapped, a princess sold to a king who was more beast than man. The maids left, and the doctors came in, their faces cold and professional. They explained, in low voices, that the pillows and oils were needed, to make things possible without hurting me. But their words couldn't hide the truth. This wasn't love. Not even duty, it was a medical procedure, a brutal experiment. The act was painful, humiliating, and terrifying. I clung to my rosary, praying for strength, but every touch felt like a violation, every moment a wound to my soul. Ferdinand's face twisted with frustration and shame, his eyes burning with anger not at me, but at himself, at the body that betrayed him. When it was over, I was left shaking, tears streaming down my face, while he turned away, silent and bitter. The doctors hurried me out, giving me a bitter drink to calm my nerves, but nothing could erase the horror of that night. From that moment, my life as queen became a living hell. Every time Ferdinand called me to his chamber, the same nightmare repeated. The doctors were always there, setting up their strange tools, their faces blank as they worked to make the impossible bearable. I tried to steel myself, to think of my duty, but each encounter left me more broken. I started to lose myself, my appetite faded, my sleep was haunted by nightmares of that monstrous shape. I'd wake up gasping, seeing it in the shadows of my room. The maids whispered that the queens before me, Maria Antonia and Maria Isabel, had suffered the same, their spirits crushed by the same ordeal. I began to understand why they didn't survive, why their eyes, in the portrait's lining. The palace halls looked so empty. Ferdinand's paranoia only made things worse. He didn't trust me, didn't trust anyone. He believed everyone was laughing at him, mocking the secret he couldn't hide. He'd stare at me during meals, searching my face for signs of betrayal, as if I'd dare speak of what happened in his chamber. One day, a maid dropped a tray near me, and Ferdinand flew into a rage, accusing her of spying. She was sent away, her family banished, all because she'd seen me flinch at his touch. I learned to move carefully, to speak softly, to hide my fear, but it was never enough. His spies were everywhere, watching my every move, reporting every word. I felt like a bird in a cage, my wings clipped, my voice silenced. The palace was a maze of secrets and fear. I heard rumors about Ferdinand's past, how he'd been mocked as a boy for his body, how he'd grown cruel to hide his shame. The courtiers spoke in hushed tones about the queens before me, how Maria Antonia screamed on her wedding night, how Maria Isabel's health broke under the strain. I wanted to ask them for help, to beg for a way out, but I knew it was useless. They were as trapped as I was, afraid of Ferdinand's wrath. I started keeping a journal, writing down every detail of those awful nights, not to remember, but to prove to myself I was still alive, still human. I hid the pages under my mattress, terrified Ferdinand's spies would find them. Spain itself was falling apart, and I saw it through the palace windows. The people were starving, the colonies were breaking away, and the court was a nest of whispers and fear. Ferdinand didn't care. His only focus was on producing an heir, on proving his body wasn't a failure. He spent fortunes on doctors and quacks who promised miracles, potions, oils, even prayers from mystics who claimed they could fix him. None of it worked, but he kept trying, and I was the one who paid the price. Each failure made him angrier, more desperate. He'd shout at me, saying I wasn't trying hard enough, that I was sabotaging him. I wanted to scream that I was doing all I could, that my body was breaking under the strain, but I stayed silent, knowing words would only bring more pain. The court became a stage for Ferdinand's madness. He'd summoned strange men, doctors from Germany, alchemists from Italy who'd examine me like I was an animal, not a queen. They'd talk about techniques and adjustments, as if I were a machine to be fixed. I felt like a specimen, not a wife. One night, a French doctor suggested a new device, a contraption of leather and wood meant to help us. I wept as they set it up, but Ferdinand only watched, his face hard. He didn't see me as a person, only as a means to an end. I started to pray not for a child, but for escape, for death, for anything to end this torment. As the months passed, I changed. The hopeful girl from Saxony was gone. I stopped smiling, stopped eating much. My hands shook when I held a cup. My voice trembled when I spoke. The courtiers noticed, but they didn't dare help. They knew what happened to those who crossed Ferdinand. I heard whispers that he'd had servants killed for knowing too much, that he'd banished entire families for a single mistake. I lived in constant fear, not just of him, but of myself, of losing the last pieces of who I was. My journal became my only friend, the only place I could pour out my pain. But even that felt dangerous, as if Ferdinand's spies could read my Thoughts.by the end of that first year, I was a shadow of myself. The wedding, the hope, the dreams all were ashes. I knew I couldn't escape. Not while Ferdinand lived. But I also knew I couldn't give up. Not yet. I had to survive, if only to tell this story one day, to let the world know what I endured. The nightmare was just beginning, and I was trapped in it, a queen in name but a prisoner in truth, bound to a king whose body and mind were a curse on us all. As I shared the wedding of 1819 and those first awful nights with Ferdinand VII plunged me into a nightmare I couldn't escape, his twisted body and cruel demands breaking my spirit. Before that, in Dresden, I was a girl with dreams of a fairy tale life, only to arrive in Spain and find a palace that felt like a tomb. Now, as Maria Josefa Amalia, Queen of Spain, I lived in the shadow of Ferdinand's madness, a world where his paranoia grew like a weed, choking every moment of my life. The palace, once a place of grand halls and golden chandeliers, became a prison of whispers and fear, where I was watched, judged, and trapped. Let me take you through those suffocating years, when Ferdinand's control tightened around me like a noose, and the weight of his distrust pushed me closer to despair. After the horrors of our first nights together, I thought I'd seen the worst of Ferdinand's darkness. I was wrong. As the months turned into years, his paranoia grew wilder, spreading through the palace like a disease. He didn't just distrust me, he distrusted everyone. Every servant, every courtier, every glance was a threat in his mind. He believed the world was laughing at him, mocking the secret he couldn't hide, the deformity that haunted him. I'd catch him staring at me during court dinners, his eyes narrow, searching for signs I was betraying him, whispering about his shame. If I smiled at a noble or spoke too long with a maid, he'd summon me later, his voice sharp, accusing me of plotting against him. "You think I'm a fool, don't you?" he'd hiss, his face red with rage. I learned to keep my eyes down, my words few, but it was never enough to calm his fears. The palace became a maze of secrets. Ferdinand had hidden passages built, narrow tunnels snaking through the walls, so he could move unseen, spying on anyone he suspected. I'd hear creaks at night, footsteps echoing behind the walls, and I'd know he was there, watching me. Once, I found a small hole in my bedroom wall, no bigger than a coin, and when I looked through, I saw his eyes staring back, cold and unblinking. My heart stopped. I covered the hole with a tapestry, but the next day, it was uncovered, as if he wanted me to know I couldn't hide. He had mirrors placed in strange corners of the palace, angled to catch every movement, every whisper. I felt like a mouse in a trap, every step watched, every breath judged. His spies were everywhere. My maids, once kind and gentle, became his eyes and ears. They'd report what I said, what I read, even how long I prayed. One morning, I dropped a letter from my sister in Saxony, asking about my health. Before I could pick it up, a maid snatched it and ran to Ferdinand. That night, he stormed into my room, waving the letter, shouting that I was sending secrets to foreign courts. "You're plotting with them, aren't you?" he screamed, his voice shaking the chandeliers. I tried to explain it was just a sister's worry, but he wouldn't listen. He burned the letter in front of me, the flames lighting up his twisted face. From then on, every letter I wrote was open. Every word I spoke was written down. I stopped writing to my family, afraid of what he'd do next. Ferdinand's obsession with having a child only made things worse. Every failure in the bedroom fueled his anger, his shame. He didn't see me as a wife, but as a tool to prove he wasn't broken. The doctors kept coming, each with new ideas, new devices, more pillows, more oils, more contraptions that made me feel like a machine, not a woman. They'd stand around the bed, taking notes as I lay there, humiliated, my body aching from the strain. Ferdinand would watch, his eyes hard, as if my pain was my fault. One night, a German doctor suggested a new leather strap to position me better. I begged to be left alone, but Ferdinand ordered it used, his voice cold. "You will give me an heir," he said, and I felt my soul shrink under his words. The palace staff lived in fear too. Servants who saw too much, maybe a glimpse of the bedroom tools or a tear on my face, disappeared. One young page who accidentally walked in while the doctors were setting up was whipped and sent away, his family exiled. Ferdinand's cruelty wasn't just for me. It was for anyone who crossed his path. Guards were moved to dangerous posts if they heard a whisper about the king's condition. Courtiers learned to speak in code, avoiding his name, afraid a wrong word could mean prison or worse. I saw a noblewoman, once a friend, vanish after she asked me if I was well. Ferdinand thought her question was a jab at his failure. The palace, once a place of music and laughter, became a silent graveyard of fear. Spain was falling apart outside these walls, and I saw it from my window. The people were hungry, the colonies were breaking free, and the court was a nest of secrets and betrayal. But Ferdinand didn't care about his kingdom. His only focus was his body, his shame, his desperate need for a child. He spent piles of gold on quacks who promised to fix him potions made of crushed shells, herbs from far-off lands, even chants from mystics who claimed they could break his curse. None of it worked, but he kept trying, and I was the one who suffered. Each failed attempt made him more unhinged. He'd pace the halls at night, muttering about enemies, about how I was failing him. I wanted to scream that I was trying, that my body was breaking, but I stayed quiet, knowing he'd only lash out. My journal became my only escape. I'd write in secret, hiding the pages in a crack behind my bed, pouring out my pain. I wrote about the nights that left me bruised, the days I felt his eyes on me, the fear that choked me. But even that was risky. Once, a maid found a loose page and handed it to Ferdinand. He read it, his face dark, and then tore it to pieces, saying I was mocking him to the world. He ordered my rooms searched, my books burned, my prayers watched. I stopped trusting anyone, even the priests. I'd pray in my room, but I'd feel his spies listening, waiting for a word they could twist against me. My health started to crumble. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My hands shook when I held a cup. My voice cracked when I spoke. I'd look in the mirror and see a stranger, thin, pale, with eyes like the queen's in the portraits, empty and haunted. I started having nightmares, not just of Ferdinand's body, but of being trapped forever, my screams unheard. The courtiers noticed, but they didn't dare help. They knew what happened to those who got too close. One maid, who once wiped my tears, was sent away the next day. I heard she died in a village alone. Ferdinand's paranoia was a shadow that covered us all, and I was at its heart. I tried to hold on to my faith, clutching the rosary my mother gave me, but even God seemed far away. I'd pray for strength, for a miracle, but the palace felt like a place where prayers went unanswered. Ferdinand's madness was contagious, creeping into my mind. I started jumping at shadows, checking behind curtains for spies. I'd wake up thinking I heard his footsteps, his voice accusing me. I was no longer Maria Josepha, the hopeful princess. I was a ghost, haunting my own life, trapped in a marriage that was killing me. By the third year, I was barely alive. The palace was a cage, Ferdinand's paranoia the bars. I knew I couldn't escape, not while he lived. But I also knew I had to keep going, if only to survive long enough to tell this story. The nightmare wasn't over, it was growing darker, and I was sinking deeper into its grip, a queen in name but a prisoner in truth, bound to a king whose madness was tearing us all apart. As I shared, the years in the Madrid palace trapped me, in a cage of Ferdinand's paranoia, his suffocating control turning every day into a battle for survival. Before that, the horrors of our marriage's early days shattered my spirit, and in Dresden, my dreams of a fairy tale life were crushed by my family's desperation. Now, as Maria Josepha Amalia, Queen of Spain, I face the fleeting hope of a pregnancy in 1829, a spark of light in my dark world, only to see it snuffed out by tragedy. The loss of my child and my own death soon after marked the end of my fight, leaving me a broken shadow of the girl I once was. Let me take you through those final, crushing moments when hope died in the palace's cold halls, and my life slipped away under the weight of Ferdinand's cursed reign. By 1829, after a decade of marriage, I was a ghost of myself. The endless nights in Ferdinand's chamber, the strange devices, the doctor's cold hands, they'd worn me down to nothing. My body was frail, my mind fragile, haunted by the fear that followed me everywhere. But then, a miracle happened. I felt a flutter in my womb, a sign of life. I was pregnant. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope, a chance that I could give Ferdinand the heir he craved, that I could escape the torment of his blame. I clutched my rosary, praying this child would be my salvation, a way to soften his cruelty, to quiet his paranoia. The court buzzed with cautious excitement, whispers of a royal heir spreading like wildfire. Even Ferdinand seemed different, his eyes lit up with a strange mix of joy and fear, as if he couldn't believe it was real. But that hope was a cruel trick. Ferdinand's obsession with the pregnancy turned it into a nightmare. He didn't trust me to carry the child safely. He thought enemies, real or imagined, would try to destroy it. He filled my rooms with guards, their swords gleaming, watching my every move. Doctors from across Europe crowded the palace, each with their own ideas about how to protect the baby. They poked and prodded me, their hands cold, their voices sharp, treating me like a fragile vase that might shatter. Ferdinand brought in mystics too, strange men in dark robes who burned incense and chanted over my belly, claiming they could ward off curses. I wanted to scream at them to leave me alone, to let me rest, but I was too weak, too scared. Ferdinand stood over it all, his face tight, muttering about plots to steal his heir. "You must not fail me," he'd say, his voice like a whip, and I felt the weight of his desperation crushing me. As the months passed, my body struggled. The pregnancy was hard, my strength fading with every day. I couldn't eat, the food tasted like ash, and I'd vomit after every meal. My hands shook, my head throbbed, and I'd wake from nightmares of losing the child. The doctors gave me bitter tonics, saying they'd help, but they only made me weaker. Ferdinand's paranoia grew worse. He had my food tasted by servants, convinced someone was poisoning me. Once, a maid dropped a spoon, and he banished her, screaming that she was part of a plot. I tried to stay calm, to focus on the baby, but the palace felt like a storm closing in. With Ferdinand's madness at its center. In the 7th month, the pain started. Sharp, burning stabs in my belly that left me gasping. I called for the doctors, but Ferdinand pushed them aside, insisting he oversee everything. He stood by my bed, shouting orders, his eyes wild. The doctors tried to explain that the baby was coming too soon, that something was wrong, but he wouldn't listen. He brought in a mystic who waved a cross over me, chanting nonsense, while I screamed in pain. The labor was a horror, blood, sweat, and agony, with Ferdinand's voice booming over it all, demanding the child live. When the baby came, a tiny girl, she was so small, so fragile. I reached for her, tears streaming down my face, but her cries were weak, fading. She lived only a few hours, her little body too weak to fight. I held her, my heart breaking as Ferdinand stood frozen, his face pale. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me alone with my grief. That loss shattered me. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My body was broken, my spirit gone. The doctors said I'd recover, but I knew they were lying. I felt death creeping closer, a cold shadow in my bones. Ferdinand didn't visit me. He sent messengers instead, demanding to know why I'd failed, as if I'd chosen to lose our child. His spies watched me even in my sickbed, reporting every tear, every whispered prayer. I heard them whisper that he blamed me, that he thought I'd done something to cause the miscarriage. I wanted to scream that I'd given everything, that my body had fought until it broke, but I had no strength left. My journal, once my refuge, lay untouched. I couldn't bear to write the pain of losing my daughter. 3 weeks later, in May 1829, I slipped away. The doctors called it childbed fever, but I knew the truth. I died of despair, my body and soul crushed by years of torment. As my breath faded, I felt a strange peace, as if God had finally answered my prayers for escape. My last thought was of my baby girl, safe from Ferdinand's world. I was 26, and my life as queen was over, ended by the same darkness that had trapped me from the start. But even in death, I couldn't fully escape. My spirit lingered in the palace, watching as Ferdinand's madness grew, his reign dragging Spain deeper into ruin. The court mourned me, but it was a hollow show. Ferdinand made a public display of grief, but I saw the truth in his eyes: anger, not sorrow. He didn't care about me, only about the heir I couldn't give him. He ordered my body examined, searching for signs of poison, convinced his enemies had killed me. The doctors found nothing, but he didn't believe them. He had my maids questioned, some arrested, their screams echoing through the palace. I watched, invisible, as he sank deeper into his paranoia, his mind unraveling. He spoke to my death mask, a plaster cast of my face, muttering about the child we lost, as if I could still hear him. It was grotesque, a final insult to my memory. Spain kept crumbling, and I saw it all from the shadows. The colonies were gone, the people starved, and the court was a nest of fear and betrayal. Ferdinand's obsession with an heir blinded him to his kingdom's pain. He spent more gold on quacks and mystics, searching for a way to cheat his cursed body, while his people suffered. The other queens, Maria Antonia and Maria Isabel, had died like me, broken by his demands. I felt their presence in the palace, their spirits as trapped as mine. We were all victims of Ferdinand's reign, of a bloodline that turned royalty into ruin. My death was the end of my suffering, but not the end of Ferdinand's story. I watched as he moved on, his heart cold, already planning a new marriage to Maria Cristina, hoping she'd give him the heir I couldn't. But I knew the truth. His curse would follow him, a shadow that no new queen could escape. My story, my pain, is a warning to the world. A king ruled by his own flaws can destroy everything: his wives, his kingdom, himself. I was Maria Josepha, a queen who dreamed of light but found only darkness. And my tragedy lives on in these words, so you'll never forget what I endured. As I shared my death in 1829, after the crushing loss of my child, freed me from the torment of Ferdinand V's reign, but my spirit lingered in the Madrid palace, trapped by the shadows of his madness. Before that, the horrors of our marriage, the suffocating control of his paranoia, and my broken dreams in Dresden shaped a life of pain. Now, as Maria Josepha Amalia, a ghost unseen in the palace halls, I watch Ferdinand's final years unfold, a grim parade of desperation, deceit, and downfall. His marriage to Maria Cristina, the birth of a child he claimed but didn't father, and his death in 1833 marked the end of his cursed reign, leaving behind a broken Spain. Let me take you through those last twisted years, when I saw the man who destroyed me unravel, and his legacy became a warning carved in blood and sorrow. After my death, the palace felt emptier, colder, as if my absence left a void even Ferdinand couldn't ignore. From the shadows, I watched him move through the halls, his face harder, his eyes wilder. My loss didn't soften him, it fueled his paranoia. He believed I'd been poisoned, that enemies had stolen his chance at an heir. He ordered my maids tortured, their cries echoing through the stone corridors, searching for proof that never existed. He kept my death mask, a plaster cast of my face, in his private chamber, talking to it as if I could answer. "Why did you fail me?" He'd mutter, his voice shaking, and I felt a chill, even as a spirit, knowing he'd never see me as anything but a tool. His mind was slipping, and the court knew it, their whispers growing louder, their fear thicker. Ferdinand didn't grieve long. Within months, he was hunting for a new wife, desperate for the heir I couldn't give him. His advisors, terrified of his rages, scrambled to find a bride who could survive him. They chose Maria Cristina of Naples, a young woman whose family, like mine, needed the alliance. I watched her arrive in 1829, her face bright with hope, just as mine had been. But there was a secret even Ferdinand didn't know at first. She was already pregnant, carrying a child that wasn't his. The court buzzed with rumors, but no one dared speak them aloud. When Ferdinand learned the truth, I expected him to explode, to banish her or worse. Instead, he accepted it, his desperation for an heir outweighing his pride. He saw it as a twisted gift, a chance to claim a child and save his dynasty. I felt a pang of pity for Maria Cristina, knowing she'd face the same horrors I did. The wedding was a farce, a quiet ceremony with none of the pomp of mine. Maria Cristina walked down the aisle, her belly slightly rounded, her eyes nervous. Ferdinand stood beside her, his smile forced, his hands twitching. The courtiers kept their heads down, afraid to meet his gaze. I hovered unseen, watching the lie unfold. When Isabella II was born in 1830, the palace erupted in forced celebration, but everyone knew the truth. She wasn't Ferdinand's daughter. He claimed her anyway, parading her as his heir, his face a mask of fake pride. I saw the torment in his eyes, the knowledge that his bloodline would end, mocked by a child who wasn't his. Maria Cristina played her part, pretending to love him, while he pretended to believe the child was his own. It was a dance of deception, and I, a silent witness, felt the weight of their shared lie. Ferdinand's paranoia grew worse after Isabella's birth. He didn't trust Maria Cristina, just as he hadn't trusted me. He had holes drilled in her chamber walls, peeking through them at night, his eye pressed to the wood like a predator. I saw him, a king reduced to a spy, watching her nurse the baby, pray, or sit alone, searching for signs of betrayal. He'd burst into her rooms with guards, shouting about treason, his face red with rage. Maria Cristina, like me, learned to move carefully, her every gesture measured, her voice soft. But I saw the fear in her eyes, the same fear I'd carried. She wrote letters to her family in Naples begging for help, but Ferdinand's spies read every word. He accused her of plotting to overthrow him, of using Isabella to steal his throne. The palace, already a prison, became a battlefield of suspicion. His obsession with control spread beyond Maria Cristina. He changed his guards daily, convinced they'd turn on him if they served too long. He tested his advisors, giving them fake orders to see if they'd argue, taking any question as proof of disloyalty. The court, once a place of elegance, turned into a snake pit, everyone watching their words, afraid of Ferdinand's wrath. I saw servants collapse from the stress, their faces pale, their hands shaking. One young maid, caught reading a letter meant for Maria Cristina, was sent to a dungeon. Her screams haunted me, a reminder of the cost of living in Ferdinand's world. Even his food was a ritual of fear. Tasters had to wait half an hour after eating, Ferdinand watching them like a hawk, waiting for signs of poison. Several fainted from the pressure, and he took it as proof of plots against him. Spain was crumbling, faster now, and I saw it from the shadows. The colonies were gone, the treasury empty, the people starving. But Ferdinand cared only about his legacy, about proving he wasn't a failure. He spent more gold on doctors and mystics, still chasing a child of his own blood. The bedroom remained a torture chamber, with Maria Cristina enduring the same horrors I had, the same strange devices, the same cold doctors. I watched her grow pale, her eyes hollow, just as mine had been. Ferdinand's health was failing to his hands shook, his sleep was broken, his speeches rambled about enemies no one else saw. The court whispered he was losing his mind, but no one dared say it aloud. By 1833, Ferdinand was a shadow of himself. I watched him waste away, his body worn out by years of fighting his own flaws. He'd sit for hours, staring at the death masks of his queen's mine, Maria Antonia's, Maria Isabel's, muttering about the heirs we never gave him. His final days were quiet, almost pitiful. He drifted in and out of sleep, calling out to us, his dead wives, as if we could forgive him. When he died, the palace let out a breath it had been holding for years. The doctors cut open his body, and I saw their faces twist in horror at what they found. That grotesque organ, scarred from his desperate attempts to fix it, a symbol of his lifelong shame. They hid their findings, locking them away, too shocking for the world to know. Ferdinand's death ended his reign, but not his legacy. Spain was a wreck, torn by war, poverty, and division. Isabella, too, the child he claimed, inherited a throne built on lies, her reign doomed by the chaos he left behind. I watched from the shadows, my spirit tied to the palace, as the kingdom struggled to heal. Ferdinand's life was a warning. A king ruled by his own demons can destroy everything: his wives, his people, his empire. I was Maria Josepha, a queen who dreamed of light but found only darkness, and my story lives on to show the world the cost of his cursed reign. As I shared, I watched from the shadows as Ferdinand V's life ended in 1833, his final years a twisted dance of paranoia, deception, and failure, leaving behind a kingdom in ruins and a child, Isabella too, who carried a lie. Before that, my own death in 1829 freed me from his torment, but my spirit remained trapped in the Madrid palace, a witness to the horrors of his reign. My marriage's early nightmares, the suffocating control of his spies, and the crushing loss of my child marked my life as queen, while my dreams in Dresden faded into a distant memory. Now, as Maria Josepha Amalia, a ghost haunting these cold halls, I look back on the wreckage of Ferdinand's rule, the pain of his queens, and the lessons carved in Spain's broken stones. Let me take you through my final thoughts, a warning from beyond, so the world never forgets the cost of a king's flaws and the danger of power unchecked. From my spectral place in the palace, I see the truth of Ferdinand's legacy, a dark stain that lingers long after his death. His reign was a storm that tore through Spain, leaving nothing but chaos. The empire that once stretched across oceans, from the Americas to the Philippines, crumbled under his watch. The colonies broke free, not just because of their own strength, but because Ferdinand was too consumed by his own shame to lead. His people starved, their cries unheard, while he poured gold into useless potions and strange machines, chasing a child his cursed body could never create. I saw the streets of Madrid, once alive with color, turn gray with hunger and despair. The palace, meant to be a beacon of power, became a tomb, its walls echoing with the screams of those he crushed. I think of the queens who came before me, Maria Antonia and Maria Isabel, their spirits as trapped as mine. We were all victims of Ferdinand's obsession, our lives sacrificed to his need to prove himself. Maria Antonia, so young and hopeful, was broken by the horror of his touch, her mind shattered before her body gave out. Maria Isabel, full of naive dreams, faced the same nightmare, her health fading under the weight of his demands. I see their faces in the palace portraits, their eyes empty, their smiles gone. We were not wives, but tools, used and discarded when we couldn't give him what he wanted. Maria Cristina, his last queen, survived him, but I saw her suffer too, her life a mirror of mine, her child a lie to hold up his crumbling throne. We were sisters in pain, bound by a king whose flaws became our prison. Ferdinand's reign shows what happens when power falls into the hands of a broken man. His body, twisted by centuries of inbreeding, was a curse he couldn't escape, but his mind was the real danger. His paranoia turned allies into enemies, his court into a battlefield. He saw betrayal in every shadow, heard mockery in every whisper. The nobles who once served him lived in fear, their loyalty tested by his wild accusations. Servants vanished, guards were banished, and the palace became a place where trust was a death sentence. I watched as Spain's pride, its art, its culture faded under his rule, replaced by suspicion and silence. A king should lift his people up, but Ferdinand dragged them down, his personal failures bleeding into the nation's wounds. The world beyond Spain saw his ruin too. From my ghostly vantage, I heard whispers from foreign courts, France, England, Austria, mocking the king who couldn't father a child, whose empire slipped through his fingers. They called him weak, a joke, a man ruled by his shame. Diplomats wrote letters, their words sharp, saying Spain was a dying power, its king too lost in his own torment to save it. Those letters, hidden in archives, are proof of how far Spain fell, how one man's flaws could topple a kingdom. The colonies that broke away used Ferdinand's failures as a rallying cry, their leaders shouting that a king so broken couldn't rule them. His shame, once a private pain, became a public disaster, a story told across the world. I think of Isabella too, the child Ferdinand claimed, though her blood wasn't his. From the shadows, I saw her grow, a little girl caught in the web of his lies. She inherited a throne built on deceit, a kingdom torn by war and poverty. Her reign was doomed from the start, carrying the weight of Ferdinand's failures. I felt a strange pity for her, a child who'd never know the truth of her father, who'd face a Spain broken by the man who raised her as his own. She was his final act of desperation, a false hope to keep his dynasty alive. But I knew, as I watched her toddle through the palace, that his curse would follow her, just as it followed me. My own pain lingers in these halls. I was Maria Josefa, a girl who dreamed of love and light, who came to Spain with a heart full of hope. But Ferdinand's world stole that from me. His deformed body, his paranoid mind, his endless need for an heir, they broke me, body and soul. I see my death mask, still kept in a hidden vault, a reminder of the queen I became, pale, empty, a shadow of the girl from Saxony. My journal, hidden under my bed, was burned by his spies, but my story lives on in my spirit's voice. I speak, now, from beyond, so you know the truth. A king's flaws can destroy more than himself. They can destroy a nation, a people, a dream. This is my warning, carried on the wind of history. Power without wisdom is a poison, and power in the hands of a broken man is a plague. Ferdinand VII was both villain and victim, a king cursed by his bloodline, driven mad by his shame. His reign shows how one man's pain can ripple outward, tearing apart everything it touches. His queen suffered, his people suffered, his kingdom suffered, all because he couldn't face his own flaws. The Madrid Palace, once a symbol of glory, stands now as a monument to his failure, its walls scarred by the weight of his reign. As I linger here, a ghost among these stones, I feel the presence of the other queens, their pain woven into mine. We are the forgotten, the ones who paid the price for a system that gave too much power to one man. Spain still bears the scars of Ferdinand's rule, its people struggling to rebuild what he broke. His story is a lesson, a cry from the past. Beware the ruler who lets his demons lead, who turns his shame into a weapon. I was Maria Josefa Amalia, a queen who dreamed of light but found only darkness, and my voice carries this truth across time, so you'll never forget. I ask you to carry this story with you. Share it, speak it, let it live. Let the world know what happened in these halls, what happened to me, to Maria Antonia, to Maria Isabel, to Maria Christina. Let the world know the cost of Ferdinand's reign, the price of a king's unchecked power. If you felt the weight of my words, hit the like button, share your thoughts, and tell me where you're hearing this from. We're connected, you and I, across the centuries, by the truth of what happened here. Don't let my suffering fade. Let it be a beacon, a warning, so history never repeats the tragedy of Ferdinand VII, the king who turned his pain into a nation's ruin.